Hello and welcome to the Animation Communication podcast, your source for discussion about animation, film, fandom, and more. So please join your host, I Love Kim Possible a Lot, or KP, and Lauren Kizich, the Abbey Roadie, for today's discussion. If you like what you hear, please remember to support by giving a like, a follow, as well as subscribing to the main I Love Kim Possible a Lot channel on YouTube. Spread the word and keep being a part of a great community. This episode contains some mild adult language.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Animation Communications podcast featuring I Love Kim Possible a Lot. And the voice that you are hearing in your ears right now is Lauren, aka the Abbey Roadie. And today we have a very special guest joining us today. It's Kira Buckland, everybody. If you don't know her, where have you been on the internet all these years? But and also if you have not been watching anime or been playing video games, I mean, she's kind of been a presence for a long time, which is awesome. So it's very exciting to have her on board today. So welcome, Kira.
Welcome. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
I was gonna be like, I don't anime, but like Nick tells me how much of a big deal you are, so I believe him. But like,
well, I think he's a little bit biased from being my friend, you know.
For context, Nick is one of our mutual friends that we know each other through. But yeah, I've known Kira for a couple of years on and off, and you were an OG pony person back in the day, right?
I feel like longer than that. I feel like I've known you for like 7 years at this point, maybe more.
We're old. Oh man,
Yeah.
I don't want to turn 30. I know you're already 30, but like I don't want to get old. Not that 30's old.
You know,
but
honestly,
how did you two
30s,
meet?
I think 30s are better than 20s.
it seems like 30s, at least you have your shit figured out a little bit more than 20. Like 20, I feel like you're just throwing stuff at the wall and you're just like, will I make money? Will I be able to pay my rent in LA? Who knows? So
yeah, 20s is like trying to figure out what exactly you're gonna do in life and who you are, I feel like, and 30s is kind of like, okay, you sort of like have a plan. You sort of have your life a little bit more figured out than you did before.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of, I think that's the point me and Lauren are reaching as far as just kind of like figuring out what like area of the industry, like, and for people listening, like, you don't have to figure it out when you're in your late 20s, but like you kind of have to just like learn what you're good at and just develop that skill eventually, you know, over time. Words are hard. But yeah, like, you know, it's all like societal expectations, and like no one's judging you if you're 30 and you're still living at home, as long as you just like have a general ambition as far as what you want to do and have a plan as far as how you want to do it. That's like, you know, that's just a good recommendation. Not that we're judging any scrubs out there. I'm gonna stop being mean for a little bit. So Kira, why don't you tell us, because a little bit about the very beginning, because I remember before I was really involved with the fandom, I remember you were in the Brony documentary, as well as you were Twilight in Pony.Mauve, right?
Yeah, that was throwback.
So how'd you get involved in horse stuff, I guess?
Honestly, it kind of was by accident. How I've gotten into a lot of the things that I've been into in the past were just sort of, you know, a friend showing it to me one day and me kind of getting hooked on something. I guess you could say I have sort of like, I don't know, maybe like an addictive personality where I get into something and I get really into it, which is, I guess kind of the thing that I've been really into for the past 5 years or so has been JoJo's Bizarre Adventures. So I've been like really, really obsessed with that and stuff. But yeah, I think back in the MLP days, it was kind of like a friend just showed it to me or something, was like, just like jokingly like, hey, you sound kind of like the main character or whatever. And there were some auditions or something going around for like a big project at the time. And I think I just tried it and people, like, it kind of blew up, and I wasn't really expecting that. Because, I mean, even long before that, I'd just been doing a bunch of stuff on the internet, you know, just like random flash animations, mostly like video game parodies, things like that. back when I first started doing this kind of stuff, the landscape was very different with like online voiceover and stuff like that. It was a lot of times the animators either just did their own voices or got like their random friends or family members, and it wasn't something that people could really do as like getting paid for or anything like that. I mean, obviously people got paid to do voiceover, but it was on like official legit stuff, and
Mm-hmm.
I didn't live in LA at the time, and I was, just sort of doing whatever I could to kind of get practice, I guess you could say. Now I feel like there's so many opportunities. There's like paid indie games. There's like all this stuff that people can do. It was just like when I started, I kind of had to like figure everything out, I guess. But now I help run a community for other people who are interested in getting into that type of work.
That's awesome.
Yeah, that's really neat. And I think, I mean, like, just observing it as a producer kind of role for the last couple of years, it's changed from, like, people, like you said, people just having, like, like Joe Bob, like, who, is my roommate or whatever, just to be in this voice because I want a different voice than myself, versus, like, people online making demo reels for, IPs that they don't even own just for fan projects and, like, potentially getting paid. It depends on the project, obviously. And I think it's great for people that want to, like, maybe who aren't in LA or, maybe are not in the physical location to be networking and to be, like, getting into, I say legitimate things, but everything's kind of legitimate, but, giving, words are hard, just being able to do, something from the convenience of just not being, like, quite there yet. It's like to develop your skill eventually, or
Right,
inevitably.
or like stuff that you can put on a resume or something, because
Mm-hmm.
a lot of these like original projects, like indie games and kind of like online independent animations and stuff like that, people might do that to help somebody out, but then they can use it as kind of like something, like, hey, I did this, here's some work experience or whatever.
Exactly. Yeah, because nowadays in the era where there's so many creators, that they can literally run their own little business entirely through, a YouTube channel or through different websites where they can air their own shows, their own content. And so, yeah, it's nowadays, it seems like it's so driven by, independent creators being able to produce that kind of content, and rightfully so, the any voice actors that get involved with that, yeah, it's more work for the resume, more work for the demo reel, and it's more more experience. And I think that's awesome that there's more tools available and devices available
Yeah.
for people to be able to do that.
And I think some of the challenges that come with that too are just like, then people are kind of figuring out like proper payments and, just like it is hard because it's interesting. You mentioned like you're basically running your own business, and that's what it
Mm-hmm.
is. I mean, I like officially registered my business like legally, like started a company and stuff last year for my work. And it was like a lot of learning, even though I've been doing this stuff for so long, it was just a lot of like, wow, I have to learn about like accounting and invoicing and, all this kind of stuff. It's like, we just want to act or we just want to create or, whatever you want to do. But it's like, even if you're an artist who's doing commissions, it doesn't matter. It's like you have to kind of essentially learn how to be a business person.
Yep.
Right, and I think, I mean, because we do it in a different angle where we're mostly nonprofit for the most part. I mean, like, I go to conventions and I do commissions, stuff like that. But as far as the actual YouTube content, we don't really try to monetize it just for the sake of, like, for the most part, we were doing fan projects, so we didn't want to run into problems as far as, like, expectations money-wise. And money's complicated, essentially. But, I think fan projects and just these small independent projects are great. Hold on, give me a second. Sorry. Oh my god.
I think I heard Pupper. Mine's snoring downstairs in the meantime.
Aww. My cats do that sometimes.
Sorry about that. My dad forgot I was recording, so he was yelling at me. And I'm like,
Oh no.
Oh,
Father, like, I just want to go back to LA when all this is over. But anyway, what I was saying is, I think fan projects, especially, like, there's been a growth in like, I think the pony fandom is just like a good example of this, but it's a very flexible market for the most part. I mean, companies really aren't C&Ding fan projects as much as they might have been maybe like 5 or 10 years ago, because they've discovered it's free advertisement. Like, I think of the Potter Puppet Pals, because I know there was just like Warner Brothers was like greedy, and then they had eventually changed their minds, and I'm like, so I don't know. I think it's just like an interesting landscape that has developed over the course of the history of the internet, essentially. But
Yeah, I was just going to add a little something, because I just see a lot of like discourse and debate about stuff, especially in the voice acting community, but I think in other sides of the creative community as well, where people kind of have this really negative mindset about fan projects and look down on them. And, you know, I think that you kind of, yes, you do have to be careful, because whenever it's somebody else's IP and this and that, you know, it's like people have to be careful not to maybe put that on like a professional resume if they're applying to a company, or to say like that they are like the voice of this character, that character, whatever. But at the same time, it's like there's something that's so beautiful and wholesome about people getting together and just creating content that they love.
Mm-hmm.
You know, back when I was in the Homestuck fandom, we would do like a lot of just little like, you know, the whole comic is a lot of text-based stuff, so we would just do like readings of it, because it's like there were no like official voices, there wasn't, you know, the audio stuff was just kind of like music generally, so we would just like do stuff like that. And yeah, it's not something you can really take to a job and be like, hey, I did this, but it's something that's just fun to do with your friends.
Yeah. Especially when you have a whole group of friends that are all passionate about the same thing, so you know you're going to get just that much more quality out of it, like excellent quality out of it, because you know everybody's just about as passionate about it as you are. So
Yeah, and it's so cool to see how far everybody's come. Like, you know, I look at some of the friends I used to know from like way back when we were all on Tumblr or whatever, and I'm seeing them in these really big projects, and it's just like so exciting.
back in the day, oh my god, I have Lauren,
before Tumblr blew up.
have you read Homesick, Lauren, just like randomly out of curiosity?
I'm familiar with it. I haven't read it, but I know about it because again, Tumblr, it flooded my feed.
Yeah.
So,
Okay, so
I mean, I know about it. I just never read it.
so stepping back, a very basic question for people who are just like, how are cartoons made? Like, what are things? So, like, Kira, what is a voice actor? Like, what is the daily, like, assuming, like, you know, it's a normal non-COVID situation, like, what would be your days if you were booked for a role? Like, you know, like, do you go in the studio? Like, how is anime different from just, like, other things? Like, describe your life, essentially.
Okay, yeah, that's a super good question. So, a lot of auditions now are actually done from home, even before COVID, just because a lot of the studios have really crazy production schedules, and they're trying to actually record their projects. So, scheduling everybody and getting them in for like 10 minutes at a time to audition, and, you know, other actors trying to make things work around their schedule and their own bookings, it's just like not super feasible anymore. So, a lot of times they say, like, have at least something kind of decent to record from home. Now we've had to do actual recordings from home for safety and health reasons, so it's kind of like everyone had to really upgrade their setup. But yeah, generally we if it's for an anime, they might send a reference video so we can hear the voice in Japanese and kind of get a feel for what that sounds like. Sometimes they'll just send a script. How much information we get when we're auditioning for something really depends, because sometimes they're like, oh, here's a picture and here's an original voice reference and here's like, you know, like 5 or 6 lines to read from. And then other times it's kind of like really, really nondescript, and you don't necessarily know what you're reading for. It might be codenamed, because especially with games, things are so secretive these days, and they're really worried about leaks. So it's, you know, sometimes you'll read for something and just not even know what you're auditioning for unless you book it. But yeah, generally when things are in a more normal state of operating, then we get in, you know, usually you're just auditioning for a bunch of stuff, throwing it at the wall, and you sort of try to forget about it. And then if you get that email being like, hey, we want to book you for this thing, then that's like a really cool surprise, you know? And then usually they schedule a time, you go in and you work with a director who kind of just guides and shapes what you're doing. And
Mhm.
ADR, or like anime dubbing, that sort of stuff, because there's different types of dubbing. There's like, I worked on a show called Miraculous Ladybug, which is a French dub. I've also done some live action dubbing and stuff like that. But it all works pretty much the same way. You'll usually preview line by line, so you'll hear what the original actor did in the previous language, and you'll look at the picture to see kind of how the timing's going to work. And it's a
Mhm.
lot of multitasking, because I meet people all the time online, or who flood my mentions or whatever, being like, "You suck. Anybody can do dubbing. You're terrible." And it's like, you say that, but like you don't see what goes into it, you know?
Exactly.
I mean, and yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but dubbing seems very complicated because not only do you have to kind of like have the same energy as the original character that, was in a whole different language, it's a whole different context, but the editors behind the scene were actually trying to match the lip flaps to like how you're talking, so it looks almost seamless, like it was like made like, purposely with your voice on it. So I think it just sounds very complicated, like God bless the editors.
Well, yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, there's a lot of different people behind the scenes who kind of go into stuff, because, I think it starts, because obviously you have like the translators who kind of like translate everything, but then you have like the ADR writers and adapters, and their job is to write the lines so that it fits the animation that's there, because you can have something in Japanese that's like twice as long or only
Mhm.
half as long as what the translation would be. So then their job is to kind of write it to fit what the animation is, what the mouth is, without losing the meaning. So, that stuff's all done before we ever come on board as actors. And then, you have the director whose job, because we record one at a time, which people don't always realize. So, then you have like the director who's kind of just guiding everybody to make sure that everything will sound good when it's put together. And
Mhm.
then, of course, you have like the audio engineer and the mixer, and they have a really important job as well, because, like you mentioned, sometimes they do have to kind of like edit our voice lines slightly to make sure that it fits. Like, normally, if something's too long or too short, they'll just have us redo it and be like, okay, we got to speed up a little to match the picture, or we got to slow down a little on this second half of the line, or whatever it is. But, sometimes if it's a matter of, oh, you just need like slightly longer pause in between these two sentences, they can just kind of chop it up and move it so that it fits the animation better.
Right. And I think, like, correct me if I'm wrong, but like for American shows, what sometimes happens is when it's so most of the time it's shipped overseas. It's shipped overseas, and when the finished animation is shipped back, then sometimes the lip syncing doesn't match the original voice line. So sometimes the actors will come in and redub some lines to sync better with the animation. So there's a lot of different reasons the actors have to basically come in and redub, but anime is a whole different ball game from what I understand comparatively to when you have to redub for American shows generally.
Yeah.
But
And I've worked on a couple, they call it prelay animation, and I've worked on a couple of those. And, it was really fun, and it was a lot of freedom because we're not restricted to timing. So we can just kind of, do the line how we would think. Because sometimes the acting isn't going to sound quite as natural, or it's going to lose some of the intent when you're restricted to exactly what's going on screen, especially if, like, there's a pause in the middle of the line that's not natural in English, or, something like that. But obviously it's like they can't change the animation, so we just kind of have to roll with it. But for a prelay animation, we obviously do have a lot more freedom. And another difference is, a lot of times when I've done it, they will actually bring actors in together. Because for games and for dubbing and stuff like that, we all just record individually, so we're not really hearing what other people did. But
Mhm.
I worked on like a couple of kids shows. I worked on Lego Friends and Yoo-Hoo and Friends, and in both of those situations, they generally brought all the actors of the main cast in together and let us play off each other. So that was fun. It's not really like feasible for other stuff, but for those kinds of records, then group recording is okay.
it must be fun kind of bouncing off each other. Does that change, like, I mean, I'm sure it does, but like how does that change like your own personal performance when you have someone like physically there versus just like in the studio by yourself all alone?
Well, one of the greatest things that I've ever been taught early on in acting classes was that acting is reacting. So everything that your character says, you're either reacting to something another character says, something that's going on in your environment.
Mhm.
You're always like responding to something. So if you have another actor there, you can just respond to them like you would if it were a play or whatever. But if you're doing it by yourself, you still have to react, but you kind of get the context elsewhere. Like, I'll look at the line that's before mine on the script and see, like, okay, I'm responding to this. Like, you have to be really fast with it in your head because it's generally just all cold reading. So it's like you don't get to, like, practice. You don't get to study the scripts. It's just kind of like you go in and they're like, okay, here's what you're doing today. And the director will explain, here's what's going on in this scene. And we just kind of have to go for it. So, yeah, I think it's a lot of like you have to make up context sometimes, or, maybe the director will tell you, okay, like this is what you're responding to here or whatever.
Right. Will like the director sometimes cold read like someone else's lines so you can respond to them too? Like, does that happen?
Not normally, but I've seen it happen a few times on like games or something where it's not something timed. Because for games, it really depends. Like, sometimes they will... What I see a lot in games is timing restrictions, but rather than matching mouth flaps specifically like you do in anime, it's kind of... Sometimes you might, like, if it's a cutscene or whatever, then you have to dub to picture. But I've seen a lot of game sessions where they're like... For example, I do a lot of mobile games that were originally in Chinese, and then we do the English version. And so we'll say, okay, the line in Chinese is like 2.5 seconds, so you can be slightly under that, but you can't go over or something like that.
Sounds complicated. Yeah, like, comparatively,
It's very technical, yeah.
Yeah, comparatively, a lot of times, especially for live action shows, sometimes for animated show, I think it depends on the show, they'll have a table read, essentially, where all the actors are sitting in the room and they're like, have the script in their hands and they're all like doing the episode, like sitting down and like, reading off each other, so this is totally different from that. So I think it's a different, I think it's interesting because like, I mean, you're kind of like comparatively just thrown in there and just like saying things versus the actor who has to like, memorize his lines and, have to physically act too versus, acting with your voice essentially. So.
Yeah. And I think both are really challenging in their own ways. I personally don't think I'd be very good at doing on-camera or stage acting. I have a face for radio, whatever. But, I feel a lot more comfortable just kind of acting with my voice. And that's what's always made sense to me or what I enjoy doing. So I know some people are like, oh, it must be harder because you only have your voice to act with. But for me, I feel like, well, I couldn't do what on-camera actors do. So I think it's just kind of, there's a lot of overlap in the skill sets because acting is acting. You're still kind of embodying a character at the end of the day, but it's just different approaches, different styles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's, like, I could never be an actor. I don't think I'm built that way, but it's just kind of interesting trying to, like, get in the mind as far as just, like, the day-to-day. I don't know, I'm rambling, so I have to ask this, and we'll keep it brief because everyone has to ask this for every actor ever, but like, so how did you break into the industry?
Well, one thing that's kind of always interesting about that question is I don't know if anybody really has a definitive moment where they're like, yeah, I made it, because it's constantly a journey, So as I mentioned earlier, and as you know, I used to do a lot of stuff online, just kind of hobby work, fan projects, whatever, you name it. And it was just kind of like learning as I went. So a lot of stuff was kind of self-taught. It was listening to other like accomplished actors who had like done way more than me, who are already working, and just sort of observing what they did. But I did take a couple acting classes early on, which really helped because it kind of reframed, I went in, this is like a misconception that a lot of people have when they first decide they want to be a voice actor, is they think it's all about like doing different voices and making your voice sound different ways and stuff. And that stuff can be helpful, but the biggest, most important thing always is just being able to embody the character and make it believable, to tell that character's truth, essentially. So that's why I think it's always good to take some acting, even if it's not voiceover specific. It can be like a theater class, whatever, even if you're like, you just want to do voice like I did. It was just like a teacher in a general acting class that I took who was really like, okay, that's great that you can do this, but I need to believe you. I need to believe everything that your character is saying. I need you to be in the moment and to like feel this, So, yeah, I guess like that's the biggest thing that I would mention. Moving to LA was obviously a big step that I had to do because most of the work is here for that kind of stuff. I feel like My Little Pony is one of the exceptions because that's done up in Canada. But, just a lot of the stuff is done in LA specifically, like a lot of video games, a lot of shows. There's also Dallas, but that's a lot of anime specifically. I kind of wanted to do everything, which is why I chose LA because I was like, yeah, I want to do anime, but I also want to do video games. I also want to do like pre-lay animation, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, and like part of the inspiration of doing like this silly little podcast is kind of giving options for people that, you don't necessarily have to be in LA to be creative and to do animation like things. Like, yes, it's helpful, like, yes, like if you want to be professional, at the end of the day, you probably need to move here for the sake of the connections and to find these opportunities. But if you just want to do fan projects, if you want to just like do an animation with a couple friends, if you just want to do something remotely, then, with the age of the internet, like you have access to pretty much all the tools you need. It's just a matter of just, doing it essentially versus just like waiting for someone to tell you. But
right.
yeah.
And the other thing too, because I see people say like they want to move to LA or they want to move to Dallas or wherever, and they say like, oh, I think if I just move there, then I'll just like find job opportunities. But the thing is, you have to be ready because it's very, very competitive. So, you can move to LA, but it's like if you don't have like a really solid professional competitive demo reel, you don't have like a resume, you don't have training, you don't have, any connections with places, like it's not going to work out most of the time unless you're really absurdly lucky, because I'll have people message me all the time on Facebook or on Twitter, wherever, and say like, hey, I was thinking about moving to LA and getting into voice acting. And I'm like, okay, what kind of acting training do you have? What do you have a demo reel? Do you have, like a website? Like, do you have like your professional marketing materials, basically? And they're like, oh no, I don't have any of that stuff, but I can do voices. And I was like, well, no one's gonna, it's like, would you apply for like an art internship if you didn't have like an artist portfolio? Would you would you apply to like a modeling agency if you didn't have like professional photos? It's like, you've got to have like, you kind of have to research all this stuff. But because technology is so, it's enabled us to do a lot more things now, I tell people, get involved with stuff like indie games. A lot of that stuff pays now. It might not pay as much as stuff in the industry, but it's like there are people who make their livings doing stuff from home. There's people who do audiobooks that they record from home a lot of times. I run a site called the Voice Acting Club, and I wrote a lot of articles. I have resources, guides, that sort of stuff. So that's something that I definitely recommend people look into. And also, it's like they can just try it for fun, just like record yourself, just doing whatever. You don't have to post it online. You don't have to do anything you don't want to do, but just be like, oh, hey, let me look up, I don't know, you could take like a comic book character or something and just read like a few of their lines and just record it, see how it sounds. Get comfortable hearing yourself because most people aren't.
Yeah, and I think, I guess I'll add two things from my limited knowledge, but like, the first thing is just like things I've heard echoed from actors giving other actors advice is there's tons of like, old school theater programs and things like that. If, there's if you're still in high school, maybe if you're still in college that are accessible and still just something to, put on your resume essentially, just, because that's still acting training, even though it's not the LA acting experience or whatever you.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And if someone does that, or if they no longer have access to something like that, and they're like, hey, I want to do a voice in specific, there are voice coaches who will do like Skype or Zoom meetings, There's, you can do a lot of, especially now, even coaches who didn't offer like coaching or classes online before, they have to do it remotely. So it's kind of, it's getting everybody more connected. And, obviously the pandemic is a really terrible thing, but I hope that something that can come out of it is maybe things won't be quite as location-based. It's just hard to know.
Yeah, WEA is really pushing for, more opportunities for women who are maybe like, maybe they just had a baby or something like that and they can't physically be in the studio, but like if they can still do storyboards from home or something like that, then, those opportunities are still maybe can be there. So I imagine like it's a similar thing for voice actors for this, obviously you can't have a crying baby in the background, if you have good equipment, but like it's just general accessibility, which I hope is improving.
Yeah.
The other thing I was going to say, I think it's, as a producer, I think it's really important too, as I've said this before, but like just having like something to show people essentially, like even if it's like, just a demo reel of fan characters, maybe you're saying that like, pre-written lines, or maybe you're like ad-libbing some new lines. Like I recommend both from what I've heard, but a lot of times in the like, especially when it's like a little bit harder, like a creative thing, like an art thing or like a background or a storyboard or whatever, like people can say, oh, I can do this, I can do that, I can give you the moon, but when they commit to it, when they have something to show, when they actually do it, that goes for a lot. Even if it's not perfect, the fact that they're still committing to doing it and showing you and meeting their deadlines and stuff like that, especially if you're working remotely, is just so important. Like, just please schedule at your time.
Yeah, and about the demo reels, it just kind of depends. I think, what you need in terms of that just depends on what you're doing. If somebody's like, hey, I want to maybe be in a few projects on YouTube, then yeah, it would be totally fine to just kind of put something together on their own and maybe upload it and be like, hey, what do you guys think of this? Does anyone have any feedback? That sort of stuff. If you're doing it to apply for like a lot of paid jobs, then it's kind of like certain standards, like there's like a certain length it has to be, and generally what people do is they hire somebody to write it for them, or they hire someone to mix it together. I've done directing for people for like, not like, the kind of reels that they'll send to like an agent or something really big, but for, if they just want something to put on a website for indie projects and for kind of, a lot of this stuff that records from home.
Speaking of equipment and recording from home, so I thought maybe 2 levels, like what would be a good, starter microphone or starter setup for someone who like maybe wants to do this, but they're not sure. So maybe like $150, $200 range. And then like, what super setup do you have that like costs a lot of money? That's probably like bomb proof,
Yeah, so for just getting started, if somebody's really not sure if they want to do this, just like a USB condenser that people use for like podcasting and stuff is fine, because it's very easy to use. It's kind of you just plug it into your computer. Usually there's not a lot of issues or a lot of specific tech that you have to learn. It's just kind of like controlling your gain and stuff like that. I do of course recommend getting a good pair of headphones, because if somebody's just listening on like, I don't know, like you just want something like studio quality headphones so that you can actually hear what you're making. And you can get like a software like Audacity that's free or whatever. Now, if somebody has a little bit more money to invest, then I definitely recommend like still getting a condenser, but one that plugs into an audio interface with an XLR cable. So there are some that are, probably like $200, $300. I don't know. Like I had an interface for about 5 years called the Scarlett Solo, and that handled a lot of what I needed it to do. I just recently upgraded my audio interface to SSL2 by Solid State Logic, and that's like it's kind of a newer interface on the market, but I have a lot of friends who work in audio, and that's something that they recommended, because they were saying like, hey, this is going to give you guys higher quality, because what's considered high quality for like recording for a lot of just like at home narration, kids learning, like that kind of stuff that I just do independently, it's not going to be the same for like maybe a big studio that we normally go in and they have thousands of dollars worth of equipment. So I got that, and then I got a Sennheiser 416, which is like almost $1,000. I got it on sale, thankfully, but it's like, it's pretty crazy. But another big thing to keep in mind, depending on how serious somebody wants to be about it, is the equipment is important, but even more important than your equipment is your recording space. So
Mm-hmm.
I have, it's like a fully pre-made booth. It's from a site called Vocal Booth, and it's pink, because of course it is. But, that's like a really big investment. Like, if you're getting a pre-made booth, it should be like you're already making money doing voiceover. You already kind of like have some sort of career path doing this, and you just need like really good quality for at-home clients. In the meantime, a lot of people, if they have access to like a walk-in closet, they'll kind of use something like that, or they'll put blankets up. There's something that a lot of voice actors know of called a PVC fort, where they take like pipes and like put moving blankets over them. It's basically you want like a space that's not going to echo or reverb or have like a lot of background noise.
Yeah.
For the people that are in between, I'll just plug what we use. So real quick, I have a Yeti, and it's great. I've had it like for the majority of my YouTube time. I think they're like $150 and a pop filter and a $20 isolation box, and I made Lauren buy an isolation box and like a decent microphone.
Yeah.
Like what, you have a Snowball, right, Lauren?
Yeah, I have a blue Snowball, and it's worked excellent for me. Like anything I put into Audacity, it turns out fantastic. So, and that doesn't cost you much at all, and it's very easily accessible. You can even get it through Amazon. And yeah, and Audacity is 100% free as a recording program. And then there's also, obviously, if you go through programs that are if you go through things that are in like Adobe Creative Cloud or anything like that, yeah, that's when they start to rack up a little bit more. But you get what you pay for, though. So I mean, it that's just how it be. But in terms of a microphone, and actually, let me think. With my headphones, I also got those off Amazon, and I think I was just like looking around at like basically what would be what was, one, the highest rated, and two, what actually people were saying about it. I had to really, really look for headphones, and I think mine are, let me see what they are actually. They're Cowan headphones, and just mind me putting them back on here. And those are Bluetooth headphones. Definitely get those if you can, because then if you record and you have a cord whacking around while you're while you're trying to record stuff, it doesn't exactly
You can hit people
work.
with it.
So yeah, smack your computer every time it glitches.
Bad computer.
But yeah.
Like the advice that I've just heard is like, just start small essentially and see like how often you use your shit essentially. So if you're like, everyone's always like, oh, I want to, be a YouTuber, I want to be a voice actor, and they get like maybe not $1,000 worth of things, but like they get like a relatively expensive microphone and they, end up not doing that thing. So like you can just start small and you can always sell your old stuff on eBay if you end up upgrading essentially. So
yeah, and if someone literally has no budget, like especially for really young people still in school, maybe they can't really get a job yet or something like that, it's, this is not a solution that will work for like actual projects, but if you just want to practice recording your voice, you can use an app on your phone, just like the voice recorder app that comes with your phone. I mean, obviously, again, that's not going to be good enough quality to send in for a project, but it can just like, you can practice recording your voice even if you have no money whatsoever.
Right, and you can probably get feedback on things like your delivery and stuff like that. So yeah, that's good. That's a good suggestion. Let's see. So the next question, so what are some of your favorite projects to work on and or favorite characters to voice? Fan projects or like actual important things?
I was actually going to be curious because I myself am a fan of Miraculous Ladybug, so I'm going to try and avoid steering it that direction.
Oh,
too
nice.
heavily.
Well, yeah, I did have a lot of fun on Ladybug. I mean, I have a fairly small character, so she doesn't talk a lot and she doesn't show up in a ton of episodes, but when she does occasionally get an episode, that's definitely a blast. I think probably my favorite thing to work on is video games, particularly fighting games, because I'm a big fighting gamer. I've always wanted like my biggest goal for the longest time was to be able to play a fighting game with my voice as one of the characters. I know that probably sounds really nerdy or silly or whatever, but one of the things really early on that I played was Soul Calibur 2, and I was always like, oh man, I wish I could be a voice in Soul Calibur. Not that I ever thought that it would actually happen, but then, like a decade later, I was 2 playable characters in Soul Calibur 6. So that is like what I count as one of my biggest accomplishments personally.
You played the long
Living
game.
the dream.
Yeah. I've actually been playable characters in 4 fighting games now, which is crazy to think.
That's awesome.
Any
You get to do all the noises, all the grunts, all the screams.
Yeah. Well, a lot of games actually have those, because even I do so many mobile games, and even for just like a lot of mobile games and stuff, you'll have like basic like, oh, here's an attack, here's a getting hit or whatever. But I don't know, just something about fighting games is, oh, that's so cool.
I just imagine like people in the studio just pretending to be punched or like,
Yeah, I mean, I tell people like physicalize and visualize it. Like if I'm, kind of mentoring actors who are just getting started or whatever, I tell them like, I know it sounds silly, but it's like you're swinging a sword, then like kind of like make that motion. Imagine that's a sword. If you're stabbing something, imagine what you're stabbing them with. Like you have to have a really good visual picture in your head of what you're doing. And one of the upsides to something like anime is you see it. It's all right there on the screen because you're matching what's already been animated. But for something like a game, it depends. You don't always see visual when you're doing it.
right.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, acting is like using your imagination. It's like playing pretend, playing dress up, whatever, when you're a kid, right?
Yeah, I mean, you're just a
yeah.
grown up, you're a professional kid. You can put that on people's business cards.
Yeah, and it's like, I mean, again, like, yeah, to your point, to have a strong, like, a visual picture, a visual imagination, I should say, to visualize what you're doing and what you're up against as a character. Yeah, it is. It's play pretend, and but you get to, and what I think what's even more fun about with voice acting is that you can go as hard as you want to on it. It's like there really isn't a limit as to what you can do.
Okay, so next question, and then we can kind of just chill and shoot the shit a little bit, is general, like, and obviously you can get as detailed or not as detailed as you want, but like, do you have, besides the things we've talked about, do you have any other general advice for people that want to become either voice actors or just, regular actors, as far as just imagining and, just being present for their role?
Yeah, well, aside from, just getting acting training and kind of practicing or doing stuff online and this and that, I guess something that I would kind of tell people to think about is to always have some kind of plan to make a living and make income aside from just that, because I think a lot of people assume that if you like get one big role, you've suddenly made it. Like I have a big article about this, but the thing is, it's like once you get paid for that job, where's your next job going to come from, So it's less about whether or not you get like some big roles and more about the consistency of that work. So, somebody who's not working on really prestigious projects but working on a lot of projects might actually be doing better financially than someone who did one really big lead role but not much else, So I always tell people to just kind of, I mean, I know people don't like hearing like have a backup plan because they think it means like a failure or something, but it doesn't mean failure. Like I had day jobs for my first 7 years in LA, and a lot of people don't realize that. And I was still working, I was still doing voice work, but it just wasn't consistent enough for that to be my only income. And even now that I'm a full-time voice actor, I still try to diversify my income however I can, I like direct people on demo reels for indie stuff. I used to do a few like classes, but I just feel like, there's some people who have a little bit more seniority in the industry who offer classes that I'd rather point them to instead. But just kind of, I guess, doing everything that you can to sort of constantly promote your career, but not in an obnoxious way, I guess.
Right.
I'm trying to get into more casting, like stuff like that. It's like, I guess you really can't get complacent. I think people just assume that if you get to a certain point, everyone will just come to you for roles. And yeah, it is a nice surprise if someone emails you out of the blue and they're like, hey, I have you in mind for this character in a game I'm making or whatever. But it's so much like just auditioning, and a lot of times you won't book what you auditioned for. So you just have to keep trying. I tell people, because everyone wants to say like, oh, acting is so much rejection, but it's not really rejection. Like, if you and 100 other people who sound like you are trying for the same part, one person gets it, does that mean like, oh, 99 of you are rejected and you're terrible? No. It just means like they chose somebody else. Like, that's not a failure on your part.
Yeah, and I know it's also never, like, for the most part, personal from my understanding. Like, unless the director knows you and just like, oh, well, I'm gonna open these auditions, but I'm leaning towards you because, like, you're my friend's daughter. I don't think, people are just like, I'm gonna spite you because I hate your guts. Like, I think it's a lot of times it's based on the creator's own personal vision as far as what they want for the character or the role or, just like what's going on in the environment. And I think people don't really understand that, as well as, when you just move to LA, like we've talked about, like, that doesn't automatically mean that, suddenly you're just gonna become a voice actor. Like, from my understanding, unless, you create a show or something like that, the people that usually just have one role that they work for is something that's, like, continuously being made over, like, long periods of time, like Family Guy or, SpongeBob or something like that, where, it's been on for, like...
And then you have a really great job, but, that's not the majority of us.
Yeah.
Oh, to be Tom Kenny.
Tom Kenny can just, like, walk into the room and he's just like, it's fine, guys, I'm Tom Kenny, it's cool. So, like, I think him and Tara are probably, like, pretty all over the place, it seems like. But Tom Kenny is the voice of SpongeBob, if you don't know who that is. So, now you know. He seems like a super cool guy from seeing him one time from a distance at a convention, so.
Admiring from afar.
But, yeah, I think he also just lucked out, I think, too, because he got Rocco and then SpongeBob, and then, you can just, like, live off SpongeBob, essentially. But, I'm trying to think.
Yeah, and there is a luck factor, too. Like, it's, it takes both. It takes being really good at what you do, but it also kind of takes, maybe it is being in the right place at the right time. Maybe a friend will happen to introduce you to someone who's, like a casting director, and you read for them and you don't book something, but then later on they have something that leads to something bigger. Like, you just never know.
Yeah. And also just, like, it does depend on also the game or show or anything. The concept of it has to be strong enough and that everybody works together to make it the strongest it can be. And when it's executed and brought out into the public, that, the response keeps it going, It's like keeping up that momentum because it's all one big machine moving together.
And most of the time, you have no idea, like some stuff that I've worked on that I thought, oh, this is going to be really big. It wasn't really. And then, I had no idea when I worked on Nier Automata that would be like the defining game of my career. I was obviously like, oh, this is really cool. Like, I hope people like it. But, if you get too hung up on, oh, I hope this is popular, it's like you're always going to set yourself up for disappointment. So I'm just kind of like, well, I had fun. I liked what I did. I hope other people like it. And then it just, like, blows up, And, I'm sure, like, even the actors who worked on My Little Pony were probably like, oh, cool, we're working on this kids show for this, like, this established brand, and then it, like, turned into something way beyond what they predicted.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just, like, having conventions for a singular show where voice actors were flying in mostly for their voice on a singular show is still, like, unheard of. Like, I don't know if, like, something like that can be replicated. I know they tried a little bit with Steven Universe, like, they had, like, that one Steven Universe con, but I think, it's good to know that it is possible, and it just takes, like, another spark, like, another weird internet craze thing for it to come again, but, like, it was just...
And Star Trek was the original, like, let's revolve a whole...
Oh, yeah, and that's still a thing. There's the big not LA, Las Vegas Star Trek Con, where they like invite everyone who's ever done anything ever, but you know. So I have a follow-up question. So what are some tips, or like what are some good ways as far as networking and getting yourself out there? Because there's 1,000,005 ways to network, and you know, it can be very draining because you don't really know who you're going to meet at these like LA networking events. But like, what is some general advice that you would give if you're just trying to network, or you're just like going to your first like voice actor networking event? You know, like, is there someone specific you look for as far as like something they do, like a casting director, or like do you have any other tips or general advice for that?
Well, honestly, I will just say that is something that I consider a weakness of mine. I'm very introverted, and I'm not good at that kind of stuff at all. I feel like I'm a very awkward person, and it's just something that I tend to avoid. I do a lot of times if I'm like trying to pitch myself for a new job, maybe I will send an email or something. Like I'll look up, like say, oh, I really want to work with this smaller company that does games. Maybe I'll look for like a contact email on their site, and I'll introduce myself and say, here's a little bit about like what I've done. Here's why I'd love to work with you guys if you're looking, that sort of thing. And a lot of times you just won't get a response, and it's like, okay. But, in person, I think it's harder. I guess, I don't know, something that I don't have a lot of advice on what to do, but I do have advice on what not to do because I've just seen it go wrong so many times.
Yeah, that'd be interesting. Please tell away.
And I think, I think the biggest thing of like what not to do is to be like really desperate or really annoying, because I like to tell people it's like dating, right? If somebody like messages you 24/7, or they're like, hey, can we hang out? Hey, can we talk to me? Hey, please respond. You know, there's a reason we make fun of stuff like that, because it's like, it makes us like not want to talk to that person ever again. So I think there's some people who maybe in like social situations where there's going to be other actors or directors, they just try really, really hard to like brag and talk themselves up constantly and be like, and by the way, here's my demo and here's my business card. And it can be like kind of off-putting to people because maybe they just wanted to go and hang out. Maybe they didn't want it to be like this big, it might be a little more appropriate at an event that's like specifically for networking, but there's people who do it in just kind of what's supposed to be like a hangout. And I think it's better to just be chill, be like a cool person, and just be like a genuine person. And, you can talk a little about what you do and this and that, but it's like, my friend gave me some advice that I thought was really good and stuck with me. And she said, be so good at what you do that people can't really ignore you, because that's the other thing is like positive word of mouth. Like if you do your best on one job and you like try to be really easy for them to work with and this and that, then they might refer you to another job. They might, maybe that director is working on something at a different place and they can say, hey, I know someone who would be good for this part. Like that's the biggest thing. I think I refer my friends for jobs all the time if I know that they can do it, but it's not because they're like sliding in my DMs every day. It's just because I'm like, hey, I know this person and they're really cool and awesome and I know that they can do this job. Or, it might even be like a role that I'm up for, but I'm like, oh, but I know someone who would be even more perfect. Like, that's the thing. It's like, it is competitive by nature, but I would say that a lot of times people will like refer each other and like support each other.
I think that's like something, that I've noticed just like living in LA for like a year. I mean, like I said, I'm not there now because of COVID and rent is expensive. But in general, people want to help people that they feel like they can do a good job, that they're friends with, like on a, friendly level. And, like it kind of goes back and forth. If you recommended this person for this project that you think they might work out for, then they'll probably remember you when, if there's a reverse opportunity, essentially. But one of my mistakes too is I think just having my business card and being like, hey, I'm a person on the internet, look at me. Especially for things like YouTubing events, just kind of asking about the other person, I think, and asking what they do is also a key for being genuine, instead of leading with like, oh, I'm John Smith. I'm the most important, boss person in the whole wide world. Like people, it kind of like, even if you're not egotistical, it can feel egotistical for someone who doesn't know you. And, I've had to kind of dial it back because I don't know what I'm doing. We all don't know what we're doing a lot of the time. But, and just also...
I think the rule of thumb is to be consistent with your work and be nice.
Right.
Just to, like, I think that's a recurring theme across all fields, is that just don't be mean and be consistent with your work.
Because if you're an asshole, then that will also travel around too. And even if you're great at what you do, people don't want to work with an asshole. They want to work with someone flexible that's going to deal with their creative bullshit. Just that. And also maybe like when you're networking, try to ask about something that's not work related. That also works a lot of times too.
Yeah, absolutely. Or, another just like really good passive way to do things is just follow people on Twitter, this and that, congratulate them if they have something cool going on. It's like, I know for me, it's like whenever I see people like other actors being really supportive and they're like, oh, like, congratulations, I'm so happy for you and stuff, even if it's like a role that maybe they tried out for too, like, we keep that stuff in mind or whatever. And and it's the same thing. Like, I try, because I know it's really easy to just kind of maybe click like on something and move on. But I try to remember to, like, actually tell my friends, like, oh, like, congratulations, or I'm really proud of you, because we see so much negativity. Oh,
no. We lost her. I think she's trying to hook back on. But but the point does still stand, because it is like, it has to do with, building that camaraderie with people, especially in an industry where there may be a lot of people, but it's still a tight-knit community because everybody's working with everybody constantly, even if it's from remote places, It's just everybody gets to know everybody at some point. So.
And unfortunately, there's drama, there's negativity, I don't think that goes away no matter what field you're in.
Mm-hmm.
I was just going to add too, I think it also, like, something I've noticed that helps me is essentially with someone with a lot of just general anxiety. I'm sure most artist type people are like that, is if you are going to a networking event, like, bring a friend, potentially one that might be interested in, the same thing you are, so you don't feel like, because, when you're stuck in, like, a small room with, like, 50 people that you don't know, and you have to awkwardly, like, inch your way into the conversation, be like, hi, please talk to me, like, I want to be involved in your conversation, like, having someone to kind of help you break the ice, or even, like, having, you guys can talk to each other and then invite someone else who might be looking awkward, in the middle of the room or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay, I think, so another question I had as we're talking about this, I think you've talked about this a little bit before, Kira, but, like, generally, because we've talked about good things to do, what are, like, some things that you've seen other people, like, do that might not be great ideas as far as, like, networking? It might, like, isolate, like, people that are trying to help them, like, any, like, do not do's as far as just, the industry and social media in general?
Yeah, there's a couple things, and, I'll preface by saying, like, I've made plenty of mistakes. We've all made mistakes, stuff happens. I think one of the big things that I've seen that a lot of people just don't know how to respond to, and it's really awkward, is when you message somebody that you don't know that well and you ask for, like, a referral or to be, essentially to be given a job. And kind of, okay, like, I'll put it from my perspective, like, I have a hard enough time getting my friends who I think are really amazing and really deserve a shot somewhere. I have a hard enough time getting them an audition for something that I know they'd be perfect for most of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody that I barely know, like, I don't know their professionalism, I don't really know if they're that skilled, maybe they have a demo reel, but a lot of people can pay somebody like $1,000 to make them sound good on a demo, And it's like, I just don't really have, like, a relationship with this person in any way, and they just message me being like, hey, I've seen that you worked on, like, this with this big project or this big studio or whatever, can you just, like, get me in? It's like, I also, like, I'm just another actor, like, and the other thing too is that when someone refers you, if it turns out that person's really not a good fit, or they just don't know how to take direction, or maybe they're just not ready, then it looks bad on me. And then if I do want to refer somebody in the future who's like, oh, this person is really good, nobody's going to take me seriously because I sent them people who didn't work out, So I think a more appropriate way, if if it's an acquaintance and you're like, hey, I really want to know how they did this type of work is to maybe be like, hey, do you have any advice on how to break into this type of work? Or, I see you're with this agency. Do you know if they're currently taking submissions? Like, to not like outright ask them to walk you in somewhere. It's one thing if you're like really close friends with somebody, you guys know each other's work, and you're like, hey, like no pressure, but would you feel comfortable doing me a favor, sort of thing. But it's definitely not something to ask people that you barely know on Facebook or Twitter or whatever.
Yeah.
And let's see. I think another thing people do a lot is following up way too much. Like, maybe they will submit their materials to someone who's like, oh, yeah, we don't have anything right now, but you can send your demo. And then a week or two later, they're already, like, spamming that person's inbox again, being like, hey, so I'm still here. Hey, do you have any work for me? And it's like, when you think about if they're dealing with hundreds of actors on a regular basis, that's, like, so quickly going to be like, okay, we're just not going to hire this person again, or we're going to filter their messages to spam, It's like, I could maybe see following up in like 6 months to a year, but don't like do it all the time, because that's really, like, I've heard of people who do like unsolicited phone calls or like walk-ins somewhere, and that's also just something that it's like
break down the door.
Really do. Yeah.
Yeah, if it's like an email like once in a little while and just saying, hey, I'm just asking how things are going, like, that's okay, like once in a while.
Yeah.
But if you're gonna be spamming them every single day consistently for several weeks, that's not okay.
Yeah, or to like call it, I think something, and also just to be mindful of the place that you're doing it. Like, I think, for example, a place like LinkedIn, an unsolicited message might be a little more welcome because people use LinkedIn specifically for business and networking. But like, I've had a lot of people try to friend like my personal Facebook account, which I say like, this is specifically for like my personal friends and family. Otherwise, you can follow me on Twitter, you can do whatever. And then it'll say like we have like 100 mutuals, so I'm like, okay, I guess I'll accept this person. And it turns out either they send something creepy, or like they just want someone to like hold their hand through everything. And I don't know how to say that without like sounding snobby, but I think that's another really important piece of advice, is to kind of do a little bit of homework. Like, if you Google, how do I become a voice actor, there's a lot of really good information that will come up. A very accomplished actor called D. Bradley Baker has a site literally called iwannabeavoiceactor.com, where he goes into a bunch of stuff. Like, there's so much information out there. So, after that, it's like if somebody has a specific question that maybe they didn't find in their research, I'd be more than happy to be like, sure, here. But there's people who just message me being like, how do I get into voice acting? And I wrote a whole big article about that. But then they're like, I think a lot of people just assume that there's some easy, sneaky backdoor way in. And it's like, it's really not. There's a reason that every article about this is a novel.
How I've heard it be described just about breaking into the industry is like, someone finds a door essentially, and then they block it up so you can't use that way anymore. So, I think is one expression. Like, I think the only thing that you get to do if you just make it essentially is that, like, a little bit of nepotism going on, where like your dad's like the director of the show, or the showrunner or something like that, and he's just like, well, I'll give you, if you want to be an actor, I'll let you be an actor on my show. But I don't think that happens that often.
Yeah, I feel like it's different now. Like, I like to talk a lot about voice acting for video games, because back in the day, there were a lot of games where it was just like, oh, the novelty is that the characters say anything at all. The characters talk, woo! So they would get, like, maybe, like, people who worked in the office, or just, like, random people off the street, or people's family members to do the voices. And it just, like, obviously really was not, like, professional sounding or high quality or anything. But, now it's, like, there's a lot of attention paid to having proper voiceover most of the time. Like, they might do an audition process of hundreds and hundreds of actors.
And I remember at one point, I remember I was a little kid. I did have some opportunities to like do voice acting auditions. And I do remember going in for what was eventually going to be Dumbo 2. And that never ended up coming to be. I think they probably made it through like pre-production maybe, and then it got axed.
Yeah, and then Lasseter is just like, nope, and that was probably a good call.
Yep. No more straight to DVD sequels after that. Um, so it was, but yeah, I remember going into that, and it was just like, even just for that opportunity, it was cool. And yeah, it's really just going for any and all of those opportunities when you have that chance. And again, with like going back to independent projects, is that now more than ever you can be able to do that from home, and being able to connect with other voice actors also from home, and just through the internet, through social media, through all of that. And yeah, but I think it's great that we can have those kind of experiences. And you know as hard as it is to kind of like break into the bigger studios and stuff like that, and into bigger productions like that, it is good to know that building up to that point is still something that you can manage to do and even do on your own. But
Yeah.
but yeah, it's just like, yeah, I would love to get into more voice acting myself on my end.
Yeah,
But
you should totally go for it. And another thing I tell people too is like, don't be too picky, because I see people who are starting out and really don't have a lot of credits, and they say stuff like, well, I just want to play leads, or I only want to be in this type of project. It's like, cool, we all want to be there. Like, welcome to any actor ever. But there's a whole supporting cast on any show that has to be filled out. And, kind of how I try to approach it, because of course sometimes we audition, we're like, oh, I really want that character. And sometimes I get it, which is a really nice surprise. But, even if they just want to bring me in to play extras in the background or whatever, to fill out a bunch of different like NPCs, I'm just happy to work. I'm just happy to be thought of and considered, because a lot of people aren't being called into that project at all,
yeah,
So if they bring you in for anything, if they're hiring you for a job, consider that a win.
yeah.
You still get paid by the hour anyway, so the only reason you're gonna get like paid more if you're a lead is because you're probably doing more hours.
Yeah.
Okay, so follow-up question, and then we'll kind of relax a little bit. Is so when people, maybe not you specifically, but when people for internet projects are contacting like other actors, whether it be like professional voice actors or just fandom people, what advice do you think as far as like wording their email like appropriately? Do you have any like insight as far as that, like to sound like they take the project seriously, that they're somewhat professional in their nature, even though it is like some fan project or maybe some independent project, something like that?
Yeah, so I would maybe just kind of give a little intro, little background on the project. It doesn't have to be anything too crazy, like you don't have to write like the entire life story or, synopsis. That could be off-putting for people, but just kind of like, maybe, for example, hey, I'm currently have been writing an indie game, and this is kind of the basic premise. It's like a dating sim, and we have like let's say like these 5 different main characters you can choose, and they each have like their own stories. I had you in mind for this character. Here's a little bit about her. Was curious to see if you'd be interested in auditioning. Because I think that's like another big thing, is just to be like, is this something you would be interested in, so that they don't feel like pressured. I've had a couple of really weird emails in the past where people just said like, hey, do this for me, here's a script. And I'm like, well, I didn't agree to do this. Like, in one case, it was something I could not do because I was involved in the official project. And I'm like, I can't, like, contractually, I cannot do this. And they're like, well, this and this and this, and I could not credit you. And he just, like, kept persisting. And I'm like, I can't do your project. Like, I don't know what you want me to tell you. Like, here, I'll give you resources to find people or whatever. But, I think just kind of being like, hey, is this something you're interested in? And, if you can, maybe include like information on the pay rate, if it's like a, if you're approaching people who like mostly do voice acting for a living, unless you're like a personal friend of them, it's probably best to only come to them if it's like something you can hire them for.
Mhm.
But, or if you don't know, you can maybe ask like, oh, could you like give me a quote on this and stuff? But if it turns out like the quote's too high or something, you can either try to negotiate or you can just be like, oh, I'm so sorry. I don't think that that's within my budget right now, but thank you anyway, you know, because there's people who get like really defensive and be like, well, I can't afford that or this or that, or, you know, demand that you lower it. And I've seen them do it with artists. I've seen people do that with like commissioners for cosplay stuff. And it's just kind of like, it's totally fine if somebody's prices just aren't within the budget, but don't be like a jerk to them about it, you know?
Right. Yeah, and I'll also add too, from my experience anyway, that, you know, as long as you're professional and, you know, obviously, like, we've given this advice in the past, but, you know, have something to show the person you're pitching the project to.
Yes.
Oh my God. So, like, there's...
Yes, so many people want to cast way too far, and, like, they're like, they don't even have scripts, they don't even have visuals, they don't have anything, and it's like, well, this is, like, especially for games, voiceover is one of the last things to be added.
And it's like, if you don't have any visuals, especially, just like, because, I mean, sometimes the visuals do dictate how voice acting will be, because you have to, well, I mean, not sometimes, a lot of the time, because you have to think, if this is going to be, like, for example, you have somebody in, like, I have this huge monster, I need to have this big, gruff, growly voice. Like, if you don't have the proper visual to go with that, how do you know if you're going to get the right voice coming out of that? So it's like...
Oh, yeah, I rely so much on the visual when I'm coming up with a voice.
Yeah, so it's like, you got to have a very cemented, concrete idea, even if some things will change over time. It's just like, just something to pitch, something for people to go off of, because if you have no foundation for what you want to go, I don't know, I just have a log line, like, build off that log line and come back with more material before you start jumping the gun on people.
Yeah. And also just, you know, make sure to proofread your email and stuff.
Yeah, it also helps too, like...
Grammar is magic.
Yeah, if you're doing fan projects specifically, it helps if, you know, or if something of that like, it helps if you have, like, you know, a preview of some, maybe not that specific project if you know, want to wait, like, if you want to wait till it's further down the line or whatever the case. It helps if you have just something to show the potential actor or actress to prove that you can actually get stuff done. Like, so this has happened a lot to me, and I'm sure it's happened a lot to you, Kira, because you've been doing this a lot longer than me, is people will, you know, for fan projects specifically, people will ask you to do stuff, and then, you know, like, my mistake was like, okay, I'll do your lines, and then I never hear about it again. And so, you know, like, now, you know, I charge if people want me to do voice lines or whatever, for their own things, like, not that I'm particularly, like, about that, but, you know, if this never sees the light of day, you know, no harm, no foul, essentially. So.
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing for nonprofit projects, because I think way back when, like, me and so many people that I knew were just doing, like, volunteer work on the internet for practice or whatever, that was one of the most frustrating things, when you record, like, 80 lines for somebody and then they just never make the project. Because now, if that happens, you know, it's disappointing, but it's not a big deal in the end, because I still got paid for my time. I still got paid for what I recorded. So it's kind of like, yeah, it sucks that the project was scrapped, but at least I got paid for my work, you know? But especially if you're asking people to volunteer for something, you know, be at least pretty sure that you want to do it. Obviously, things happen. Sometimes it's beyond your control if a project gets canceled, but, you know, just try to make sure that it's work you can actually use. What else? I feel like there's something I'm missing. Oh, and I guess, like, another thing too is maybe try to give a heads up on content warnings on the project, because I know, like, every actor has their own different comfort level. Like, I'm, you know, I've traditionally been pretty comfortable with a lot of things. I'm like, it's just my voice, whatever. But, for example, there's some people where maybe if there's, like, suggestive content in it, they might not feel comfortable recording it. Or, you know, you just don't want a situation where down the line you have to recast somebody because they're like, well, I don't want to voice that scene, or, oh, I didn't realize that this project had this type of content or whatever. Yeah,
that's a big mistake I've made in the past, is not being explicit as far as, you know, not that I've done anything NS safe or not safe for work or anything like that, but, and I think it also gets the actor, like, more excited if they have, like, context too, as far as what is happening, like, as well as their comfort level.
Yeah. And sometimes they'll still be totally fine with doing it, but maybe they want to be credited under a different name or not credited at all, or, whatever. So,
There's so many of those, like those movies that, the ones that end up on, Phalus's channel or anything like that on YouTube, the ones that have like all these like smaller productions where all of these voice actors, they say go uncredited, when really I think it's like some of them were like, okay, I did that, but you know what? I don't want my name on that. I did what you
Yeah.
asked me to, but please don't put my name on it.
Oh god, yeah, I just like flashbacks about this is kind of a little bit irrelevant, but I think Kira, were you the Twilight cast for like Journey of the Spark or whatever?
Oh, it's hard to remember because that was so long ago that I know I did a lot of those projects, but it's just hard to remember specifically which ones that I did or didn't do.
Okay, because that was just the example that came to mind where essentially someone is being too ambitious with an idea, and then the pitch was a full-length My Little Pony fan movie, like a 2-hour feature movie, like I think like the 3rd or 4th season.
Yeah, that sounds vaguely
Yeah,
familiar.
but I can look it up I can look it up later, but like and I was always like hesitant because I know how hard it is to like get a 20-minute animation done from start to animatic to finish. So the fact that they were just like, we're gonna do it, and then they ended up doing it. It's just like, I just feel bad for all the voice actors who had to record like good 45-hour chunks of audio that never see the light of day. So yeah, just know what you're doing essentially.
Well, it's also possible that the people didn't actually record that much, because I know there's some things where it's just people do a little bit of dialogue at a time, like, oh, here's the first script, or here's the first
that's fair.
episode, or whatever.
Yeah. Okay, so last question before I round it out. So what is your favorite Bowie song?
Oh, yes, I approve of this question. I love so
Maybe
many
give people background
I love
about
pretty
how
much
much you
every
love
Bowie
David
song.
Bowie.
Yes. So David Bowie is kind of like my biggest creative inspiration of all time. I just adore him, and I don't know, his music just is something that always makes me happy. To be like super real talk, I struggle with depression, so, I think it's important to kind of have like those songs that you can listen to, or something that like kind of puts you in a better headspace when you really need it.
Mhm.
And a lot of people think, oh, like they maybe know 5 songs by Bowie because it's the same ones that play on the radio all the time. And those are good songs, but the man had 5 decades of music.
Mhm.
So my favorite Bowie song is from what's actually one of his most popular and iconic albums, The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. But the song itself is like one of the most underrated tracks on the album, in my opinion. It's just called Star. And I love this song. I don't know why. I can't really explain it. It's just something about it that, I don't know, it's the way it makes me feel, I guess.
Yeah, and plus, I feel like you just can't go wrong with somebody like David Bowie, and he was so just when you have these stars in our celebrity realm, and it's like he was kind of like one of those. It was like with Prince, where you have these creative geniuses that they just kind of were. Their talent just far exceeded what anybody could have ever expected of anybody, and it just transcends.
Right. And, it's like also David Bowie was not afraid to be himself and to, be kind of out of the ordinary. And I've always felt like I'm, kind of been shamed, especially growing up, for being kind of weird or, whatever. And he helped me kind of realize that it's not necessarily a bad thing to be different from an everyday person, or, to do your own thing. And then just from a totally shallow standpoint, it's super hot.
Yeah. I mean, no lie there.
Lauren really likes the Beatles, so like, it's kind of similar.
You're preaching to the choir of the rock stars here.
I think that's, besides, like, the hot thing is great, but I think the other thing about, being okay with being kind of odd, because I think that's just the artist's like MO in general is a good note to end on. So thank you so much, Kira, for your time. You've been great. You're a good friend. I like you. Hopefully when I'm back in LA, we can all hang out and like get some caffeine, because I know that's like a thing that you like to do.
Yes. The best.
Do you like caffeine?
Well, thank
I
you
like
so
caffeine.
much for having me. Yeah. Have a coffee.
We'll toast like whatever like what boba or whatever people get in LA. I didn't know what boba was until I moved to LA.
I'm still an espresso girl at heart. I mean, if you all remember when I had an OC pony, the cutie mark was literally an espresso cup. Like, that has not changed.
I think you and Lauren are birds of a feather then. And you know, in case you all, in case anyone cares, Kira, if I ever need a Twilight, which probably won't happen as much anyway, because like we don't really do pony content anymore. I always ask Kira. I'm always flabbergasted with how easy she is to get a hold of, especially for fan project stuff. So like, thank you for being a good guest, but also a good working partner person, and like overall a good person.
Yeah, you're a friend, so you know I'm always down to do stuff for you if it's something I'm able to do at the time.
I'm glad to include you in my fun things I do on the internet. But thank you for listening to this episode of Animation Communication. Kira, where can people find you if they want to stalk you, like, appropriately?
Mostly on Twitter. My Twitter is just my name. I do have an Instagram at Killer Coffee Queen, and then I have like a Facebook business page. If anyone wants to look me up, it's under like Kira Voices.
Okay. So you can go follow Kira. We follow each other on Twitter. It's neato. I think that's it. We have new episodes every Wednesday, 6 a.m. on like Spotify and stuff, and then like later on for YouTube. Any other plugs, Lauren? Because I can't think of any right now because I'm tired.
Any links we'll provide to Kira's work and her because you have a website where you've been writing blogs and articles and stuff like that, correct? About voice acting.
Yeah, and that one is just voiceactingclub.com. We also have a Discord server. I'm one of the admins, but we've got a whole team there. And it's like kind of where people can not only maybe post projects for creative collaboration or audition for projects like that, but also kind of ask about equipment, ask for feedback on stuff, or just chat.
Yeah. So if you're into voice acting, I think Kira's the person to talk to as long as it's appropriate. But do your homework first. I appreciate it. But yeah, thanks again, Kira. And please watch, if you're new to the podcast, please watch some more. We work really hard on it. We work hard at it. But yeah, and I'm sure I'll have Kira back when we want to do some charity stuff, because charity is always good. We'll go save some cats or something.
Yeah.
So.
Yes.
All right, bye everyone. See you next Wednesday, ideally. So.
Good night, everybody.
Take care.
Thank you so much for listening to Animation Communication on YouTube, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider. We are really hoping this show makes a difference in how people view animation and media, as well as giving and providing advice for people all over the world who like or want to join the animation or media industry. If you liked what you heard, please remember to subscribe and rate those 5 stars, as well as tell your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our main YouTube channel, I Love Kim Possible a Lot, and turn those notifications on. My name is Scribbler, and you have been listening to Animation Kimmunication.